So now that we've kind of understand the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop and how we use them, let's take a little time to just understand how to use the program and the interface. Now, in Illustrator, there are a few tools that you will become very familiar with, right? Now, we use the selection tools not too long ago, so you kind of have an idea of what that does. Um, we're also going to use the pen tool, which are these. Illustrator is all about lines, and lines are created using the pen tool. We're also going to use this tool here, and this is the tool that has to do with the fill and the stroke of the artwork that you create. Now, in a nutshell, Photoshop is primarily used to edit things that are created, maybe an image created by a camera or a painting created by a hand sketch. It's mainly a manipulation tool, whereas Illustrator is a creation tool. Illustrator is primarily used to create things, maybe create logos, because it doesn't use pixels. When you create things in Illustrator, you're not limited by size. So we're going to take a look on how to create things in Illustrator. So we created a circle and we manipulated it. Now with the same circle, I want you to select it. Now this tool here allows us to select the object as a whole. So if I click on this with this selection tool, notice the object is selected. How do I know the object is selected? Well, firstly, it gives me this blue box surrounding the object, and also it tells me that I have an object selected, and the type of object I have selected is a path. Now it also shows me a bunch of tools on my options bar that are related to the object that I select. So I am able to change these items for this object that I have selected here. So that's kind of the notion how Illustrator works. Now, if I select that tool there, which is that one there, which is called your direct selection tool, I'm going to click that. Notice it's selected. Now I'm able to modify the anchors that make up this shape, and these are the anchors. Now I'm not selecting the object as a whole, I'm actually selecting the elements that make up this object. So now I'm able to select this point here. And how do I know this point is selected? Now this is where you actually have to watch very close. Now I have selected this point here. Because I use the direct selection tool, it enables me to select the points that make up the object. Now if I look at this point, notice that this point is a filled point. It's filled, whereas this point is empty. Also notice this point here. Notice it's an empty point. This is filled. And I look on this one here. So this is how you know that I have selected this point, because it's actually filled. Now it's very tiny, so you know that's just how Illustrator is. But this is how you know that I have selected this point here, and I can now manipulate this point. Notice that when I change this point, these other two points here and here remain stationary. Then the path that connects this point here are manipulated automatically because I am moving this point up here, and that's a very revolutionary thing for artwork on the computer. The computer is actually calculating what the curves will be like every time I move this point here, and it does that and keep the curves smooth, which can help you tremendously when you need to edit artwork. Now, at first it might seem very annoying to click these points because sometimes you click and you try to move and it doesn't move readily. My suggestion for that is to first click once, ensure that it is filled and nothing else is filled, then you click and hold and drag to move. So again, click once, click to drag, click once, click to drag, click once, click to drag. If you adapt this method, you'll be able to select points more efficiently in Illustrator. Okay, so we have actually created something using the shape tool. We draw a shape and we manipulated the points using the direct selection tool. Now let's look a little bit on the color. Now notice that I've selected the shape. It is filled with black. Now if I take a look at my tool right here, there are two major elements that are represented here, and every shape in Illustrator must adhere to these rules. And the rules are: every shape is made up of a stroke and a fill. So this shape here has a black fill. It also has a black stroke. So what is a stroke? The stroke is the edges of the shape, and the fill is what is inside of the shape. So that's inside. So inside the shape I have black. On the edge of the shape I also have black. So let's say I modify that. Let's say I want the fill to be a different color. All I do is double click that and let's choose green. Choose OK. Now notice it didn't change, and the reason it didn't change is because I really didn't select the object. What I really selected was a point, and I can't change the color of a point. Now remember, my direct selection tool allows me to only select points that make up the object. If I wanted to select the object as a whole, I would have needed to switch to my selection tool. So let's do that. Switch to my selection tool. Now let's click on the object. How do we know that the object is selected? Well, we see the blue box around it, and we also see the name of the object. Now it's selected. I can double click on the fill color. Let's change that to green, and it changes. Now notice now that my fill is now green. My stroke is still black, so you can see that black line around the object. So what if I wanted to change the stroke? Well, firstly I would need to click on it. Now when I click on the stroke, notice that the stroke came on top and the fill fell below the stroke. So this is telling me that the stroke is now active. I can choose the color of the stroke. So I can double click on the stroke and let's change that to a pink or purple. And now it's changed. Now It's a little small, so I'm guessing you're not seeing the purple edge, but it's actually there. Okay, now what we're going to do is let's try and create a shape from scratch. So I am going to now use another tool, which is called the pen tool. So that's going to be this tool right here. Now I'm going to click the tool and I'm going to start drawing. Now when you draw in Illustrator, you draw by clicking once. So let's draw a simple shape. Let's draw the shape of a house. So I'm going to click once. Now notice when I move the mouse, it is connecting me to the anchor. Also notice that it's snapping. It's actually snapping to tell me that okay, this line is straight, and it also from time to time gives me an alignment. So notice this is a very accurate program. It promotes accuracy. So I'm going to draw this house relatively small. That's there, and you can follow along. Now notice I start to see the fill coming into play because I've already, the last thing I chose was to have a green fill and a purple stroke. I go up and I'm just drawing this by free and just eyeballing it. Now I'm going to close it and notice that I get a little circle which is very similar to Photoshop. Okay. Now after I've created this shape, let's say I now want to manipulate these points. Maybe my house wasn't very accurate and I want it to be accurate. Maybe I want to change the pitch of the roof. Well, in order to do that, remember that the direct selection tool is the tool that allows us to select these points. Whereas the selection tool would allow me to select the object as a whole. So if I want to select the points that make up the object, I would have to go to the direct selection tool, and I can now click once, then click and drag. Click and drag. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I want to move this object off of my artboard because I'm not concentrating on this object now. So of course, because I want to move the object as a whole, I want to move this entire object, not a single point. I would need to ensure that I've selected now the selection tool, which allows me the selection tool, and then I can now click on this object and I can move it off the artboard. Now when I move objects off the artboard, they're still very much active, but it simply means that if I should choose to print this page, it will only print what is on the artboard. Okay, so we're going to now make this house a little bigger. So I'm going to put it in the center. I'm moving with the selection tool, and I'm going to extend the size of this house. Alright, now I'm going to use my direct selection tool to just try and make my house a little bit more accurate. There we go. So let's add a few other elements to this. Now I could use my pen tool here and I could add, let's just add another shape for now. Let's add a square. There. Now I'm going to use my selection tool and I'm going to move the square right here. So let's say this is a window. Now if I wanted to give this window a different fill color, I would of course need to change my fill color here. So to do that, I would need to click this here, double click it, and let's change that to perhaps a blue color. Now let's not forget layering that we learned in Photoshop previously. Why is it that the blue square is on top of this original shape? Now if I go to my layers, and layers in Illustrator is accessed the same way as Photoshop, I could go to my window menu, and then I go to layers, and my layers panel will come up. Now this layers panel, now you will notice one addition to the layer panel, and that is this little arrow icon right there. Now what this allows us to do is to go to a sub layer, and what this is saying is that this layer is made up of these objects. So if the blue square is below the green house, notice that this object now goes behind, and that's because of the position that it is in the layers box. It is behind the layer with the green house, so hence it now goes behind. So if I wanted to put it back on top, I would drag it back up by dragging it like that. Now the next thing I want us to pay attention to is the different symbols that's represented when we try to use the pen tool. So I'm going to click the pen tool again, that's this tool here. Now right away you might notice that the pen tool has an asterisk to the lower right of the icon. Now this represents the creation of a new line. However, notice that when I hover over an existing point, let's select this object first. When I hover over an existing point, it changes from an asterisk to a minus sign. Let's try that again. Minus. Minus. No, I'm not clicking, I'm just hovering. Now what does this mean? It means that when I click, it will actually remove that point, and that's why there's a minus sign there. Now if I hover over the line, notice it gives me a plus symbol, and if I click it, it gives me a new point there, and I can actually use my direct selection tool to select this point and then move it. So that's how you manipulate lines in Illustrator, by using the pen tool. What is important is paying attention to the symbols that is represented beside the tool, so that you know that if you hover over a point, you'll actually delete the point versus creating a whole new line. Now we're going to look at another option. Suppose I wanted to let my strokes be thicker. Well, to do this, I could simply select the object, and remember how Illustrator works. Once I select the object, it will give me a range of tools on my options bar that I can change because I've selected this object, which is different from Photoshop, because Photoshop displays options based on the tools you select, whereas Illustrator displays options based on the object that you select. Right? So I've selected a path object, and these are the options available to me with this object. So I can change, for example, the fill color, which I can also change here. So if you'll notice, these two are actually the same. I can change the stroke color, which is actually the same thing here as well. I can also change the stroke thickness, and this becomes important. That's here. Right now the thickness of my stroke is 2.3 points, and if I increase this, notice that the strokes get bigger. Now additionally, I can put the mouse in here and click and type it, or I could use the mouse wheel to quickly adjust the size. Now additionally, if you are using the newer version of Photoshop, you should be able to click on the stroke text and you will actually get a myriad of other options available to you, right? Now there are other things that you can change. For example, you can change it from the type of line to a line that gets thicker and thinner, and you can change things like the opacity and so forth. Now another thing that you might want to change, but it might actually annoy you a bit, is let's say I want to change the fill color here. Let's say I wanted to change it to a brown. I might do that and notice that nothing has changed. Now this might happen to you, and if it does, what you have to remember is that the reason nothing has changed is because nothing is selected. So because Illustrator is object based, you have to ensure that you always select the object first by using the selection tool. And of course, when you select an object, you see the bounding box, but more importantly, you see what you have selected here. And once you do that, now things will change.